Hello. We're at, welcome back to Bricked, as I am calling this series now. It is late in, early morning, really. It's late. I decided to get some of this done, just for fun. This is where to relax a bit. We're going to bed. And I did 3 worlds instead of 2 because there is so little to write about. That's why I decided to do an extra one, which turned out to be smart because it seems that there are 2 worlds left after the ones I've already done. So without further ado, let's begin with World 4, Giant Land. This is half a page of notes. It is that boring. It's a giant land. He likes it. And let's see. The only interesting thing in here is 2 things. He treats exploits kind of like they're unique to the golden age of video games, even though they are, pretty typical, stable modern gaming. It's not just because you can patch things doesn't mean everything gets patched. It's weird, but that's more like a minor point of interest. The real more interesting one is the fact that he really, really loves the Tanuki suit. He'll start going out of his way to preserve the Tanuki suit and wear it, even in situations where it makes things worse. And when he loses it, he's genuinely angry and or describes being upset about this, being frustrated with himself for letting himself lose it. He really likes it, the Tanuki suit. Which, losing a Tanuki suit, actually having a gamer rage moment over that's something. I don't know what to make of that, really. I find it an interesting detail, but not one that really adds up to a puzzle piece in the picture of this greater narrative that is Brick by Brick. Just very, curious, and that's about it. And that's Giant Land. I have other notes, but it's really not interesting enough to go into them. They're just more for me at that point. Skyland is also very boring. There was a journal entry. The journal entry before in Giant Land was about just complaining about the speed of this project. This is one of the few journal entries. This is the first journal entry in a while that's actually substantive. Sorry, that's actually remotely interesting, not substantive. It's about, he mentions that he reviewed Battleship and he thought it was one of the worst things he did. It was a very terrible movie and he has not thought of it in a while. That's fun for me, but that's not that substantive at all. Let's be real. There's a bit where I made the note that every time he tries to praise something in this book, throughout this book, and I mentioned this before, but I think it's worth reiterating. The premise of this book, by having it be a book, just makes it difficult for anything to work. He's great praising visual details that we can't see as if we can see them. And doesn't give you a reference or anything. It's a text on the page. It's just insane. And it just hurts, basically, your ability to engage. It causes this Giant World, Sky World, and Iceland to all be tedious reads because I I don't care anymore. I'm not watching. I don't see the drama, and he's not good enough of a writer to get me invested in the drama. Like a better way to do this would just be like to go into the real life bits, find the emotional core, and then tip, 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 tip back and forth. Which he's trying to do, but he's not comfortable being vulnerable enough to really do that. So we're stuck with this tedious nonsense. Hey, here's a fun fact. Did you know that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote sci-fi? I didn't, but now you know as well. Cool. This is going to be a thing that shows up a bunch of times in this section, so I actually think it's worth mentioning. It seems like he's really busy. Like he's constantly working on getting new reviews out, on big picture stuff. I imagine Game Overthinker as well. He's like throwing eggs, at the wall, to the point where the only time he's able to work on this project is on Saturday nights, which is telling to me of a busy work schedule. Also, he researches Flintstone spin-offs for a project. Neat, I guess? I imagine it got turned into a video somewhere. It's already out. Or maybe not. But anyway, he's sleeping like shit. That's the big thing. He has a weird work-life balance, it seems. Like he's a bit of a workaholic, is my impression. Like he'll work even when he really shouldn't. Or like he works on Memorial Day and try to get ahead. And given how busy he is, that makes perfect sense. And so it just seems stressful. So yeah, that's a thing I noticed. But yeah, that was Skyland, by the way. If you notice, Skyland is just as boring as Giant World. I'm not even going to bother describing the world. It just isn't. That's all that was interesting. Iceland actually does have something interesting. And see, it turns out he doesn't like Iceland at all because it's hard and also was built around ice physics, which building a level around ice physics in a platformer is always a dangerous game for being the toasted line between fun in a difficult sense and frustrating in a difficult sense. Or bullshit, as some might say. But he doesn't outright say that. We'll get back into that later. The difficulty, by the way, is such a consistent issue for him that, for one level, one of the few times he breaks his rule about stream of consciousness, where every failure is recorded to an extent. All his failures are recorded. That falls apart. He doesn't commit to it because he's died so many times. I think that highlights the difficulty spike that is hit at this point. But he treats it like a footnote, like, we'll just skip over this. And it dovetails into this thing where you can tell this is kind of a form of Mario hagiography, because even when faced with a genuine criticism or something, or even something close to it, he doesn't bite. He just goes, "I don't like this world as much. It's not my favorite," which is just so weak. It is very weak, given the things he has said to other works. It just highlights how precious he is about this game, and how kind of surreal it is to read sometimes, where he's invested in a way that this does not translate, at least for me. I'm here, he's here, so it's amusing to see him pull his punch when he clearly is not enjoying section as much. And speaking of things that aren't as enjoyable, well, first, actually, before I get into this bit, because it's a bit of a heavier bit, one last thing. This is a small, minor detail. It really doesn't matter that much. But you know how he keeps explaining things? Well, at this point, the thing he explains again, or explains to the audience who should really know this by now, is the concept of slowdown, or, your frame rate drops, that kind of thing. You know what? When your game is processing so much that it slows down and can't run as fast and feels like you're going through slow motion, which then becomes bullet time when properly implemented into a game as an actual mechanic. The fact that he's explaining this is weird, but we already knew this, so I'm not going to elaborate further. This bit, though, okay, so this is where we get into an actual real event, a real event that's actually substantive, in that his grandmother, so she's in the hospital, she's still in the hospital, she's been consistently stuck in the hospital because her condition is bad enough to need constant attention. They believe that her condition is fading, and so they ask movie Bob Chipman, to say his goodbyes. He goes there, says his goodbyes the best he can, but he admits that he is not comfortable with mortality or accepting mortality or handling any of these bigger life issues, because he likes being in control and he doesn't know how to deal with things that are outside of his control. He doesn't handle that stuff well. Which, if you've watched Movie Bob throughout the years, that's pretty obvious. It's like when he responds to big events that frustrate or scare him, he responds in a very heavy-handed manner that I think reflects that. So that makes sense. That fits within his brand. But the thing that struck me, though, is he does this, he says goodbye. And while he's going away, he wants to happy up. He wants to just, clear his head and just move on, which is, very human. I think a lot of people, when dealing with something sad or stressful, try to, push past it. But it strikes me because it fits into this theme of him not knowing how to give himself true emotional vulnerability or emotional honesty with himself. Like he's saying one thing, but his life is showing another, kind of thing. An example of this kind of immaturity, or one could be read into it. Actually, that's not fair. But anyway, he goes to the arcade to feel better. And he points out that he's doing the same thing that he did when he was a kid, which is using video games as a coping mechanism, which, I mean, I would argue that's been obvious. Like, when you think about his work-life balance being kind of shit, it makes this project act as a way for him to escape from his own work through other bits of work. Which is a kind of depressing thing to say out loud, now that I did that. Now, if you're wondering now, luckily for him, the grandmother, at this point, her condition can improve suddenly, and the doctors were like, well, we were being premature. We were being premature in saying she was about to die. She's not dead yet. But that moment, I think, highlights, in my mind, his own, a lot of the flaws of the insecurities of his psyche that permeate throughout the brand of Movie Bob. And as a passage that helps you understand the brand and him and his persona, I think it's very revealing. And this is the most interesting section of all 3 worlds. And that's where it ends. We move on to Pipe Maze and then Dark World, which, yeah, it's fitting that the actual heavy moment hits here because it's supposed to be a difficult world, right? But yeah, this book is just bad. I know I've been basically saying that, but like this bit was a slog. I really did not. I skimmed. I was skimming throughout this section. Like it all was because kind of a blur. And like it's just not the stuff that I'm more here for at this point is the journal entries and the stuff that gives you these little glimpses into his worldview or his psyche. Like his design bits are pedestrian and kind of boring. He has bits of trivia, but the trivia is just exhausting and feels so condescending. It's just all of it is so frustrating in its tedium. My hope is that we'll learn and get more journal entries as it goes on. The first bit of the next world already has a more interesting journal entry about moving, but we'll cover that next time. I think I'm going to finish the book tomorrow, or rather today. Later today, I'm going to finish the book and make my final entry with closing thoughts on the whole experience. So look forward to that. Anyway, until then, goodbye.